Despicable, a Dvar Torah for Parashat Shoftim.
Most school trips in Israel will eventually arrive at some kind of monument or another, many of them with historical national stories behind them which the educator in attendance will use to try and mold the character of the younger generation with gut-wrenching stories which will be immediately forgotten even by those who will stand quietly long enough to hear them in the first place. The problem with this practice is that these monuments are called Matzevot, and this week's Parsha tells us that Hashem hates Matzevot, and the question is, why? Now, before anyone runs to dismantle the nearest monument, we should start with figuring out what a Matzeva in the Torah is. The first thing we know about Matzevot is that they seem to have been an acceptable form of worship in Sefer Bereshit and Sefer Shemot. Yaakov erects a number of Matzevot, and so does Moshe. Another fun fact we know about Matzevot is that they are erected, mutzavot or mukamot, as opposed to altars which are built, nivnot. This terminology is fairly consistent throughout Tanakh, except for when the more neutral verb la'asot is used. That's why Rashi's explanation that a matzeva is a form of altar which instead of being built out of a number of stones is made of a single stone, erected for the purpose of sacrificing upon, makes sense. What is now difficult to understand is why should Hashem be so vehemently against these matzevot if they A. fulfill the same purpose as altars, and B. were used by our forefathers? Rashi's answer to this is simple. At some point during history, matzevot became the preferred method of idol worshipping, thus transmogrifying from an approved and beloved form of worshipping Hashem to a prohibited and despicable act hated and rejected by Him. This approach does lead to some difficulties, though. Does this mean that every time a positive activity is picked up by a group which we don't get along with, then we automatically drop the activity? I wouldn't want to stop learning Tanakh because my idol-worshipping neighbors took a fancy to it. Also, why drop the matzevot and keep the altars? Surely enough idol-worshippers have kept the altar as their preferred method of worship. That is why other commentators offer different approaches to our problem. Ramban and Ralbag both claim that we have misidentified the matzeva. Ramban explains the matzeva as a podium where the priest would stand so that the crowds could see them, and Ralbag says it was a house around which the worshippers would gather. What they both have in common is that as opposed to the altar, which is an integral part of worshipping right itself, that's where the offering was brought, the matzeva was only a secondary tool to make worshipping easier. Giving up the matzeva would be like the difference between driving a stick shift and an automatic car. Giving up the altars would be the difference between driving and walking. Ibn Ezra agrees with Rashi that the matzeva was a type of altar, and he proves this from the fact that when Yaakov pours oil on his matzeva on the way back from Haran, the term used was vayasech alea hanesech, a term saved for liquid offerings brought on altars. Where he disagrees is questioning how something so positive should have changed to something so negative. That's why Ibn Ezra says that Hashem doesn't hate matzevot in general, rather Bnei Israel shouldn't build the specific kinds of matzevot which Hashem hates, which according to Ibn Ezra are matzevot meant for idol worshipping. To these ideas I can add Rabbi Yosef Bechor Shor, who says that there are two kinds of matzevot, those for worship which are banned and those for remembrance which are fine, so tour guides can heave a sigh of relief, and Rashar Hirsch, who says that the single stone matzeva represents the individual, which in Sefer Bereshit is totally natural, but once we become a nation, worship should be held only on the many-stoned altar, which represents the collective people, so I will, but I'll also like to offer a half-baked notion of my own. Sefer Dvarim presents a shift of thinking from the wandering Mishkan to the permanent Mikdash. This becomes evident in the words used to describe where worship is supposed to take place. The word Mizbeach, altar, appears in Sefer Dvarim only 10 times, considerably less than any other book in the Torah. The phrase used instead is Hamakom Asher Yivchar Hashem, the place chosen by Hashem, which appears in Sefer Dvarim 21 times, which is 21 times more than all other books of the Torah combined. In other words, the focus of the avodah changes from the altar to the place of the altar, which suggests more permanence. I believe this can also offer some insight as to why the altar, a more permanent structure, is chosen over the matzeva, a turned-over stone, as the proper method of worship. According to this, what Hashem hates isn't the matzeva, it's instability. If you enjoyed this video and want to make more of them a stable part of your week, please subscribe to my channel. You could also forward it to a friend, maybe they'll want to do it too. I am Dovi Holtz, one who loves Tanakh.